"You will not attend your sister's wedding unless you beg for forgiveness, my mother," said her voice so cold it could freeze glass. I laughed not because it was funny, but because it was the moment I finally understood what I meant to them, nothing more than a checkbook with a pulse. My sister Lauren's voice echoed faintly through the phone speaker, giggling in the background. "She won't do it, Mom. She can't live without our money." That sentence burned itself into my mind. For years, I had been their quiet savior, the one who paid the bills, covered the debts, and funded the dreams that weren't mine. And now this exile by ultimatum. That night, as the rain hammered my Seattle window, I realized I wasn't the weak one in this family. They were. By midnight, my suitcase lay open. By 2 a.m., a first-class ticket to Bora Bora blinked on my laptop screen. By dawn, I was gone. The city outside my window looked like a painting someone had spilled gray ink on. The rain drummed against the glass in a steady rhythm, a sound that had always calmed me before. Tonight it felt like a countdown. I could see my own reflection, pale and hollow-eyed, staring back at me. 33 years old, a senior investment consultant at one of the top firms in Seattle, and yet here I was being told to beg for forgiveness just to be allowed into my sister's wedding. The irony was bitter. I was the one who had paid for most of the engagement party, the down payment on the venue, even part of her designer dress. But I was the one who had to apologize. The call had come out of nowhere. I had just finished a client report when my phone rang. "Mom," I answered, expecting the usual small talk. But her tone was clipped, rehearsed. "Lauren's very upset," she said. "You humiliated her at dinner last night." I blinked, confused. "I made a joke. A cruel one," she snapped. "If you want to attend the wedding, you'll apologize. Otherwise, don't bother showing up." Then came Lauren's voice in the background, soft but cutting. "She won't do it, Mom. She needs us too much." A pause. "She can't live without our money." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there for a long time, frozen, the phone still in my hand. The room felt smaller somehow, the air heavier. Their words echoed, bouncing around inside my skull. "She can't live without our money." I almost laughed again. If only they knew how wrong they were. I had built my own life from the ground up, piece by piece, without anyone's help. The only difference was that I had spent years using that success to clean up their messes. I had been the safety net they refused to acknowledge existed. I poured myself a glass of wine and sank onto the couch. The memory of the dinner replayed in vivid detail. Lauren sitting at the head of the table, glowing with pride as she showed off her engagement ring, and Ethan's new Tesla parked outside. Our parents hanging on her every word, their eyes full of adoration. Then someone had asked, "How did you two afford the new house already?" Lauren had smiled coyly, but before she could answer, I'd said lightly, "She's good at finding people to foot the bill." I meant it as a joke, but the air had gone still. Lauren's face turned rigid. My mother shot me a look sharp enough to slice through bone. "That's not funny, Clara," she hissed. The rest of the dinner was silence, broken only by the clinking of silverware. Now, less than 24 hours later, I was being told to beg. The humiliation stung more than I expected. I had done everything right, graduated with honors, bought my own condo, worked hard, never asked for help. And yet, in their eyes, I was still the backup plan, the reliable daughter who could be counted on to fix everything, no matter how unfair. It wasn't love. It was control dressed up as family loyalty. The rain grew heavier, streaking down the glass in silvery ribbons. I set my glass down and stood pacing the living room. My mind raced through all the years I had quietly carried their weight. The time I paid off Dad's hospital bill, $8,000 they promised to return but never did. The 5 years I covered the family's utility payments because times were tight. The endless bailouts for Lauren's credit card, debt, her spontaneous vacations, her impulsive purchases that she always justified as networking expenses. Every dollar had been a silent apology for something I didn't do wrong. I walked to the bookshelf and ran my fingers along the spines of the financial reports stacked there. Each one represented a client, a life I had helped stabilize. I was good at fixing other people's chaos. I had just never learned to stop fixing my family's. My phone buzzed again, breaking the silence. A new message flashed on the screen from Mom. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Lauren deserves her special day. You owe her that much." I read it 3 times before the words finally sank in. You owe her. It was like being slapped. I opened my laptop. The blue light washed over the room, casting everything in cold tones. My reflection in the screen looked calm, almost detached. I typed Bora flights into the search bar. The first option that appeared was a non-stop flight leaving in 6 hours. First class. Expensive. I didn't care. For the first time in my life, money felt like a weapon I could use for myself. I clicked book now. As the confirmation email hit my inbox, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else, a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I went to my bedroom and pulled out my suitcase. I didn't pack much. A few dresses, a swimsuit, my laptop, and a folder of financial records I kept locked away. It wasn't just proof of my independence, it was proof of everything they had taken for granted. Receipts, transfers, account numbers, payment confirmations, my invisible history. At 2 in the morning, I stood by the window again, watching the city sleep. The rain had slowed to a mist. Below, cars hissed along wet streets, headlights smearing across the pavement like fading memories. I thought about what my mother had said about forgiveness. I wasn't sure if I could ever forgive them, but I knew one thing for certain: I was done begging. I wasn't their savior anymore. I wasn't their scapegoat. I was done financing their illusion of perfection. I zipped up my suitcase, the sound slicing through the quiet. My phone buzzed again, another message, this time from Lauren. "Don't be dramatic. Just say sorry. It's not that deep." I turned the screen face down on the counter. It was that deep. It was 33 years deep. The clock on the wall read 2:07 a.m. I grabbed my coat and keys. The air outside was cold, sharp, almost cleansing. The city smelled like wet pavement and freedom. I took one last look at my apartment before locking the door behind me. The hallway lights flickered as I walked toward the elevator. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was adrenaline, anticipation, a new beginning. At the curb, I hailed a cab. The driver glanced at my luggage. "Heading to the airport?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, sliding into the back seat. First flight out. As the cab pulled away, the skyline of Seattle faded behind me, gray towers swallowed by mist. I felt the tension leave my shoulders, replaced by a strange electric thrill. I didn't know what waited for me in Bora, but I knew what I was leaving behind. As the highway opened up before us, I leaned my head against the cool glass and closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing approval or forgiveness. I was chasing freedom, and I had just bought my one-way ticket. The plane hummed softly beneath me as the lights of Seattle vanished into a blur below. Through the oval window, the sky was turning from steel gray to a deep midnight blue, streaked with faint gold where the sun had just set. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, I wasn't rushing to fix someone else's problem. I wasn't the safety net, the accountant, the reliable one. I was a woman flying toward freedom, not knowing what waited on the other side. The hum of the engines was almost hypnotic. Around me, passengers whispered quietly or slept the glow of their screens, flickering across calm faces. My mind, however, refused to rest. It spun backward through years I'd spent, trying to be the perfect daughter, the dependable sister. Every memory was a thread of the same tapestry: silent sacrifice and a hunger to be seen. I could almost hear my mother's voice. "You're the practical one, Clara. We can always count on you." I had worn those words like a badge of honor until they turned into shackles. I remembered being 25, still paying off student loans while my sister Lauren was traveling across Europe on money she didn't earn. My parents called her the dreamer while I was the stable one. They laughed about it at dinner, proud of how different we were. I laughed too, pretending it didn't sting. Every family needs a provider, my mother would say, sipping wine as if she were complimenting me. What she really meant was, every family needs someone to clean up the mess. The first bailout came early. My father called one night, his voice shaky. "Sweetheart, your mom and I got behind on the mortgage. Just for a month or two. We'll pay you right back." I was 26, newly promoted, barely saving enough for myself, but I transferred $5,000 anyway. He thanked me over and over. I believed him when he said he'd pay it back. He never did. I didn't ask again. That's how it began, not with demand, but with gratitude. Gratitude that turned into expectation. As the plane climbed higher, the city disappeared beneath the clouds. I sipped my coffee and thought of all the times I'd been told I was lucky to have such a close family. Lucky wasn't the word. Bound was. Lauren always knew how to spin her chaos into sympathy. "Can you just cover rent this month? My clients are late paying. Can you pay off my card? I'll send it right back when my check clears." I always said yes. I told myself it was temporary, that one day she'd return the favor. But she never did. I opened my eyes and stared out at the darkness beyond the window. I wondered if they were home right now, realizing the credit cards didn't work, that the bills weren't magically paid. A flicker of guilt crossed my chest, but it faded quickly. For years I had been the invisible scaffolding holding up their lives. Now they would finally feel the emptiness I'd been living with. Maybe that was karma. The flight attendants dimmed the lights. I pulled the thin blanket over my lap and tried to sleep, but the memories wouldn't stop. The day my father's heart failed, the panic, the hospital bills, the relief when I found enough savings to cover the surgery. $8,000 gone overnight. My mother crying, my sister saying, "You're amazing, Clara. You saved him." They never brought it up again. The gratitude lasted a week. The expectation lasted years. I had become their insurance policy. Some turbulence shook the cabin. I gripped the armrest, but I wasn't afraid. It almost felt fitting, a little chaos in exchange for clarity. I watched lightning flicker faintly in the distance, illuminating the clouds. That's what my family had been like, flashes of warmth between storms of silence. I'd been the one holding the umbrella, always dry enough to keep standing, never safe enough to rest. I thought about the way Lauren had smiled at the engagement dinner just days ago, her manicured hand resting on her fiancé Ethan's arm. "She's jealous," she'd said after I made that joke about her finding people to foot the bill. I saw the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes when Mom took her side. Maybe she'd been waiting for that moment all along, the day she could finally make me the villain. I turned off the overhead light and closed my eyes again. The sound of the engines faded into the background, and for a moment, I pictured my parents' house, the kitchen, with the flickering light, the pile of unopened mail, the echo of arguments behind closed doors. They were probably blaming me, already calling me ungrateful, unstable, heartless. I let them. For once their words couldn't reach me. I remembered another time not long after Dad's recovery when Mom called in tears because their water heater had broken. I had just received my first work bonus, $1,000 I had planned to use for something small and personal, maybe a weekend trip. Instead, I sent it to her without hesitation. "You're such a blessing," she said, and hung up. I never did get that trip. It always went like that, one crisis after another, each one wearing a different disguise. A car repair, a forgotten bill, a wedding deposit. My life had been a series of withdrawals dressed up as gratitude. The clouds began to thin as the plane crossed into morning. I pulled the window shade open slightly and saw streaks of soft orange light breaking through. It was almost beautiful, the kind of beauty that doesn't ask for permission. I wondered what they'd say when they realized I wasn't coming back, when they finally understood that every convenience in their world had come from my quiet sacrifices. Maybe they'd call it betrayal. But it wasn't betrayal. It was balance. I thought about forgiveness, how my therapist once said, it wasn't about excusing others but freeing yourself from the expectation of change. I'd spent my entire life waiting for change that never came. Maybe the forgiveness I needed was for myself, for staying so long, for giving so much, for mistaking manipulation for love. The flight attendant approached with a gentle smile. "Would you like breakfast, ma'am?" I looked up at her and realized I was starving. "Yes," I said softly. My voice didn't sound like mine anymore. It sounded lighter. She handed me a tray eggs fruit toast. I ate slowly, savoring each bite. Simple, quiet nourishment, something I hadn't given myself in years. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky gold, I opened my journal, something I hadn't touched since college, and began to write. Not about them, but about me. "I want peace," I wrote. "I want my life back." The words looked foreign on paper, like they belonged to someone braver. I kept writing small things at first: swim again, laugh without guilt, stop saying sorry for existing. Every word felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I'd pawned off in exchange for approval. The captain announced our descent. I looked out the window at the expanse of blue water below, dotted with islands that shimmered under the morning light. Bora Bora looked like a dream, impossibly vivid. My heart thudded, not from fear, but anticipation. As the plane tilted downward, sunlight poured through the cabin, spilling across my hands. For years, I'd lived under fluorescent lights and cold gazes, building a life that belonged to everyone but me. Now I was chasing warmth I hadn't known I deserved. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt. Passengers stirred, stretching and smiling. I gathered my things, feeling the weight of my life back home lift from my shoulders like a coat I'd finally outgrown. Stepping onto the tarmac, the heat hit me thick, humid, alive. The air smelled of salt and something sweet like flowers after rain. I squinted against the sunlight, blinking away tears I hadn't realized were there. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Forgiveness, revenge, maybe both. But as I stood there with the ocean glimmering before me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was done being the dependable one. I was finally free. The air smelled like sea salt and sunlight as I stepped off the small boat onto the dock. The water was the kind of blue that felt almost unreal, the kind you only saw in travel magazines while waiting in a doctor's office. A breeze lifted my hair, and for the first time in years, I felt something close to calm. The driver handed me my luggage with a polite smile, but I could barely focus. My eyes stayed on the horizon, on that endless sweep of ocean that felt like a mirror, vast, unjudging, free. The resort wasn't large, just a scattering of thatched bungalows stretching over the lagoon like pieces of driftwood. I followed the attendant along a wooden walkway, my sandals tapping softly against the planks. Every step away from the boat felt like a step away from my old life. The sound of the water below me, gentle and constant, replaced the hum of city traffic that had lived in my ears for so long. Inside the bungalow, the air was cool and still. White curtains billowed in the breeze from the open deck doors. I stood for a long moment, my suitcase forgotten beside me. The quiet pressed against me in a way that was almost unsettling. No phone buzzing, no voice calling my name. Just the rhythmic lap of waves beneath the floor. I poured myself a glass of water, sat on the edge of the bed, and let the stillness settle around me. The first real breath I took burned a little on the way out. It was strange, realizing that peace could hurt, that it could feel like muscles unused for too long. I had imagined this moment 1,000 times in the past few days, but now that it was here, I didn't know what to do with it. Freedom had always been a fantasy. Now it was a fact, and it felt both exhilarating and terrifying. I opened the balcony doors wider and stepped outside. The sunlight was blinding at first, reflecting off the glassy water below. Tiny fish darted through the shallows, flashes of silver against the coral. A light wind swept across my face, carrying the faint scent of coconut and salt. I leaned on the railing and whispered to myself, "You made it out." Inside, my phone buzzed again, persistent, vibrating against the desk. I turned and stared at it. The screen lit up with my mother's name, then Lauren's. I didn't answer. A few seconds later, a text appeared. The power went out. "Did you forget to pay the bill?" Another followed quickly after. "Call me right now, Clara." I silenced the phone and placed it face down. My hands trembled slightly as I exhaled, but the tremor wasn't fear, it was something else. The The feeling of control, maybe. Or maybe it was simply relief. For once, I wasn't responsible for fixing anything. I walked to the kitchenette, made myself coffee, and sat by the window watching the lagoon shimmer under the rising sunday. The bitter taste grounded me. I thought about all the times I'd rushed through mornings, balancing phone calls and deadlines, juggling my family's emergencies before my own life even began. Here the hours stretched wide open, slow and forgiving. When I checked the phone again, it showed 12 missed calls and 10 unread messages. The last one from Lauren said, "What did you do? Ethan's card isn't working either." A quiet laugh escaped me. It wasn't cruel, just incredulous. How quickly their confidence unraveled without me. How fragile their world was when they couldn't reach me with a single demand. I could almost picture them, my mother, pacing the kitchen, Lauren, shouting, my father silent in the background, pretending not to see. I closed the phone again and set it aside. Outside, a small motorboat crossed the horizon, leaving ripples in its wake. I watched the water smooth itself back into calmness within seconds. That's what I wanted to be, like that water, disturbed but never broken. Later that afternoon, I unpacked, slowly arranging clothes neatly in drawers, though I didn't plan to stay long. It wasn't about settling in, it was about reclaiming order. I placed my laptop on the desk, the same one where I'd spent years working overtime to fund everyone else's lives. Now it would serve a different purpose. I plugged it in, powered it on, and stared at the blank desktop for a long time. A single thought flickered. If they wanted to know what life looked like without me, I'd show them. The decision came not from rage, but from clarity. My whole life I'd believed revenge had to be loud, that justice had to be dramatic. But this quiet, methodical control felt stronger than shouting ever could. I opened my banking app. My name appeared across multiple accounts, each tied to a different family bill, each one a tether I'd let them attach to me. My cursor hovered for a second before I clicked Manage Access. The confirmation windows popped up one by one. Freeze account, yes. Disable autopay, yes. Remove joint authorization, yes. Each click was a small liberation. My pulse steadied as the notifications confirmed what I already knew: my ties were dissolving one decision at a time. After that, I opened the utility company's websites: water, electricity, gas, all still linked to my name, my cards, my quiet generosity. I canceled each automatic payment, saving the confirmations like a ritual. When I reached the shared phone plan, I paused. My mother and Lauren's numbers glowed on the screen extensions of me. I dialed customer service. "Good afternoon," the woman on the line chirped. "How can I assist you today?" "Yes," I said evenly. "I'd like to remove 2 lines from my plan." Her voice brightened. "Certainly. Can I have the numbers, please?" I read them out carefully. The typing on the other end was soft, rhythmic. "All set," she said. "The 2 lines have been disconnected. They'll receive notifications shortly." "Thank you," I replied and hung up. I stared at the silent phone on the table, imagining their panic as the world they'd built on my quiet labor began to crumble. But it wasn't glee that filled me, it was peace, the kind that comes when the noise finally stops. The sun was beginning to set when I walked outside again. The air was warm and the horizon burned with gold and pink. I sat on the edge of the deck, letting my feet dangle into the water. It was warm, almost silky, and for a moment I felt weightless. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of small waves against wood, each one soft and forgiving. Behind me, my phone vibrated nonstop. I didn't need to look to know what the messages said. I could hear them in my mind: my mother's frantic texts, Lauren's angry ones, my father's half-hearted attempts to mediate. I reached back, picked up the phone, and turned it off completely. The silence that followed was exquisite. When darkness settled over the island, I lit a single candle on the deck and poured myself a glass of wine. The lagoon mirrored the stars, and the sound of the ocean merged with my heartbeat. I thought of Seattle: gray streets, fluorescent offices, cold rain, and wondered if they were sitting in the dark now, blaming me. Maybe this was revenge. Maybe it was justice. Or maybe it was simply the price of freedom. I took a sip of wine and whispered into the night. You taught me silence was obedience. I turned it into power. The wind carried the words across the water, and I smiled faintly. The world around me was quiet, but inside for the first time it wasn't empty. It was full of strength of defiance, of something that felt dangerously close to peace. As I went inside to sleep, the candle still burned, small and steady, a single flame, surrounded by darkness. It flickered when the breeze came through the open window, but it didn't go out. Neither would I. The morning light slipped through the white curtains, painting thin golden stripes across the floor. I woke to the sound of the sea brushing softly beneath the bungalow, each wave a slow heartbeat against the stilts. For a moment I stayed still, listening to the quiet hum of paradise. The world outside was peaceful, but inside me there was a steady pulse of purpose. I hadn't come here to escape anymore. I had come to finish what I started. I made coffee and carried the cup out to the small wooden desk by the open doors. The lagoon stretched endlessly before me, turquoise fading into deep blue. The stillness made my hands steadier than they had been in months. I set my laptop on the desk, opened it, and watched the glow fill the room. Some wars, I whispered, are won without raising your voice. The first thing I opened was my messages. Old texts from my mother, each one a thread of control disguised as love. Don't forget the electricity bill. Lauren's card was declined. Can you fix it? You're so reliable, sweetheart. Words that used to sting now made me strangely calm. I scrolled further. You're lucky to have a family that depends on you. Be grateful we trust you with these things. Manipulation woven neatly between pleasantries. I deleted the entire thread. Next came Lauren's messages, her voice echoing through the words on screen. Can you transfer me $400? I'll pay you back. Friday, promise. Ethan's family invited us to Miami and I can't show up, broke. You get it right, I remembered that text. I had just paid their water bill that morning. I'd laughed at her audacity then, but it wasn't funny anymore. I selected them all and hit archive. It felt like cleaning out a wound. I opened my online banking account. My pulse slowed. The list of linked accounts scrolled down like a roll call of my servitude. My parents' mortgage, their utilities, their credit cards, all still connected to me. Each one a quiet leash I had allowed them to tie around me. Click. Freeze account. Confirm. Click. Disable automatic transfers. Confirm. Click. Remove shared authorization. Confirm. Each confirmation window made a small sound, a soft chime, the kind you might hear in a temple. It was mechanical, but I felt something spiritual in it. Years of guilt unspooling line by line, replaced by a silence that hummed with freedom. Then I turned to the utilities. Gas, electricity, water, internet. I canceled each automatic payment, screenshotting the confirmations. My name vanished from the accounts one by one. For the first time, the bills were truly theirs. I imagined my mother's confusion when she realized the payments hadn't gone through, her disbelief turning to anger, then fear. I didn't smile, I just breathed. The last one was the phone plan. It was something I'd paid for since Lauren was in college, a habit that had followed us into adulthood. I dialed the number for customer service. The hold music was soft jazz, cheerful and oblivious. When a woman answered, her voice was friendly and bright. Good morning, this is Jessica. How can I help you today? I'd like to remove 2 lines from my plan, I said. Certainly, may I have the numbers I gave them? She typed quickly, efficient and polite. All set, she said. The 2 lines have been disconnected. They'll receive a message shortly. Thank you. When I hung up, I stared at the phone. Somewhere in Seattle, 2 devices would soon go silent, the signal cut off. For years, they had used my voice, my name, my resources to stay connected. Now, the line between us had literally been severed. Outside, the ocean shimmered. I took my coffee to the balcony and sat down, letting the sunlight warm my skin. The guilt tried to return, whispering the old lie. They're your family. You can't just cut them off. But the breeze carried it away. I had spent a lifetime being their safety net. They had mistaken my kindness for dependence. Now they would see who really needed whom. The phone began to buzz again. Even without sound, the vibration against the wood was constant, relentless. I flipped it over. Messages stacked across the lock screen. Why are our cards frozen? The bank says you changed something. Clara, call us right now. The power's out. Are you behind this? I watched the notifications multiply unread. The rhythm of the buzzing matched the sound of the waves like nature itself was mocking their panic. I didn't open a single one. I just set the phone face down and went for a swim. The water was warm and clear, wrapping around me like silk. I floated on my back, staring up at the open sky. The sunlight danced across the surface, blinding and beautiful. I thought about all the years I'd carried their problems on my shoulders, the endless calls, the late-night payments, the guilt that followed every refusal. I'd thought love meant fixing everything, but now I knew love had boundaries. Without them, it wasn't love, it was servitude. When I came back inside, my skin smelled of salt and freedom. The phone lay where I'd left it, vibrating again. I didn't touch it. Instead, I sat at the desk and opened a new folder on my laptop. I began to organize everything, every receipt, every transfer, every document, proving where the money had gone. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about clarity, about building something that could stand against their lies. The folder filled quickly. Dad's surgery, $8,000. Lauren's rent, $1,200. Credit card payments, $5,600. House utilities, $12,000. The numbers blurred together, forming the story of my silence. I titled the folder, The Weston Ledger, and backed it up to the cloud. Outside, the sun was setting, turning the lagoon into molten gold. I closed the laptop and leaned back in the chair. The quiet around me was profound. My revenge wasn't loud or cruel. It was balanced. For every year I had been their invisible provider, they would now feel the weight of their own choices. I poured another glass of wine and walked to the edge of the deck. The sky was streaked with pink and violet. My reflection wavered on the water's surface, unfamiliar and calm. The air smelled of salt and wet wood. I took a slow breath and whispered, "They built their world on my silence. Let silence be their undoing." Inside, the phone pulsed again, a desperate, lifeless rhythm. I imagined the scene unfolding back home, my mother's panic as the house went dark, my sister's rage as her card was declined at some boutique, my father's quiet confusion as he realized he had no idea how any of it worked without me. The sound didn't bother me. It was the noise of a life I'd finally left behind. When the first drops of rain began to fall, I didn't move inside. I stood there, letting the water run down my skin. The storm rolled across the horizon, distant thunder echoing softly. It felt poetic somehow, nature washing away everything old. Back inside, I dried off and changed into a loose dress. The room smelled faintly of sea air and rain. I lit a single candle on the table beside the bed, its flames steady and small. The phone had stopped vibrating. I picked it up, checked the screen. 69 missed calls, over 100 unread messages. I turned it off completely and set it aside. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming gently on the roof. I lay on the bed, eyes open, listening. I thought of every sacrifice, every debt, every quiet moment when I'd chosen them over myself. And then I thought of this peace. This quiet control, this strength that came not from anger, but from clarity. Before sleep took me, I whispered one last thought into the dark. They asked me to beg. I answered with silence. The candle flickered once, then steadied, burning bright and still against the storm. The sun was barely up when I opened my eyes. The lagoon outside shimmered in soft morning light waves, whispering against the stilts of the bungalow. It should have been a peaceful morning, but the air already felt charged heavy with something I couldn't name. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stepped out onto the deck. The horizon glowed faintly pink, a calm I didn't trust. Somewhere across the ocean, the first cracks in my family's perfect facade were beginning to form. I hadn't planned to check my phone, but habit still lingered like a bruise. I turned it over once, half expecting another flood of messages, and there they were, 27 missed calls, dozens of texts. I didn't open them. I just stared at the numbers, then placed the phone face down on the table. I sipped my coffee slowly, letting the heat burn my tongue. The silence felt sharper than ever, like I was listening for something from far away. I imagined my mother waking up in the old house, her silk robe tied tight around her waist, heading straight to the kitchen to make coffee. The first clue would have come with the hiss of the coffee maker, refusing to turn on. Then the light switched, nothing. She would have frowned, checked the breaker, then the bills. And that's when she'd see it, payment overdue. She'd call my father first, then Lauren, then me. And when I didn't answer, the panic would spread. I took another sip of coffee and smiled, not out of cruelty but recognition. For years I had been the invisible thread holding them together. Now they were finally tugging on a rope that no longer existed. A small motorboat passed by, its wake rippling through the lagoon. The air smelled of salt and coconut oil. My life felt so far removed from theirs, it was almost surreal, like I was watching someone else's movie. I stretched my legs out on the deck chair, feeling the sun creep across my skin. My phone began to vibrate again. I ignored it until the sound became a steady pulse. Finally, curiosity won. I picked it up and glanced at the screen. The messages were short and frantic. "The power's out. Clara, why would you do this? Your father's credit card got declined at the pharmacy. The florist just called. Lauren's wedding deposit bounced. What the hell did you do?" I set the phone down gently, the vibration still echoing in my hand. My heart didn't race this time. It simply beat steady and sure. In Seattle, the morning was unraveling fast. I could picture it perfectly, the kitchen in disarray. My mother's voice sharp as a knife, my father fumbling for answers, Lauren pacing and cursing into her dead phone. Ethan would be there too, the picture of confusion, wondering why his fiancé's family suddenly looked like a circus act. They would try to pin it on me, of course. They always did. Clara's unstable. Clara's being dramatic. Clara can't stand not being the center of attention. The old guilt tried to rise, but I didn't let it. I just breathed it out. I put the phone in a drawer, closed it, and walked down to the beach. The sand was soft, warm under my bare feet. The water was clear enough to see small fish darting around the rocks near the shore. I waded in until the ocean reached my knees, the sunlight dancing on the surface. They must have been calling again. I could almost hear the echo of it in the back of my mind. My name said not with love, but with need. For once, I didn't feel compelled to answer. When I returned to the bungalow, I found a voicemail waiting from Lauren. Her voice trembled, half anger, half fear. "Clara, this isn't funny. Mom's crying, Dad's freaking out, and Ethan's asking questions I can't answer. You've gone too far this time. Fix it, right now." The message ended abruptly, followed by another from my mother. "Clara, please. Whatever this is, you've made your point. We can't pay the bills, the accounts are frozen, the wedding's in chaos. You don't want this on your conscience." I sat down on the edge of the bed and listened to both messages again. The irony made me laugh out loud. My conscience, that was rich. They had built their comfort on my guilt for years, and now they were trying to weaponize it one last time. The hours passed slowly. By noon, the lagoon shimmered like glass, the heat pressing down gently. I turned my phone on once more and saw that the messages had multiplied. My mother again, Lauren, my father even. The desperation was palpable. "Please call us. We don't understand what's happening." Lauren's crying. "We can't get through to the bank. Clara, you're ruining everything. You've always been ungrateful. This is your sister's wedding week. For God's sake, stop this." I didn't respond. I just watched the screen light up, message after message. Each one was a small victory, a sign that the balance had finally shifted. The silence they'd forced me to live in for so long was now theirs to endure. Back home, the unraveling would only get worse. Harriet would call the bank manager, only to be told that she no longer had shared authorization. Lauren would drive to Ethan's house, rehearsing lies about a banking error while trying to hide her panic. My father would sit at the kitchen table, head in his hands, realizing for the first time just how little control he'd ever had. The image brought me no joy, just quiet satisfaction. Justice didn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looked like balance being restored. By late afternoon, I walked down to the water again, this time swimming out past the shallow coral. The current was gentle, wrapping around me like a living thing. I floated on my back, letting the world go still. For years, I'd been weighed down by responsibility, by their expectations, by guilt. Now the water carried me effortlessly, and I let it. When I finally went back inside, the phone had stopped buzzing. For a brief second, I thought maybe they'd given up. Then it vibrated one last time. A new message from Lauren. Ethan just called off the wedding. He found out everything. Are you happy now? I stared at the words for a long time. A part of me wanted to feel pity, but it never came. She had built her relationship on lies, funded by my silence. It wasn't my job to save her from the truth. I closed the message and turned off the phone again. That evening, I poured a glass of wine and stood on the balcony as the sun sank behind the horizon. The air was heavy with humidity, the sky glowing orange and gold. The ocean below reflected it all, endless and alive. I thought of my family sitting in that cold, dark house in Seattle, surrounded by the chaos they'd created, and whispered softly, "You taught me to survive in silence. Now silence is your teacher." The first stars appeared overhead, bright and steady. I watched them until the sky turned fully dark. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from somewhere far away. I took another sip of wine, feeling something settle inside me, a deep, unmoving peace. For the first time in years, the world wasn't heavy. It was just quiet. And that quiet, I realized, was mine. The rain arrived before dawn, soft and rhythmic, tapping against the roof of the bungalow like a heartbeat. I woke to the smell of wet air and salt. The world outside was blurred by a mist that hung low over the lagoon, turning everything into shades of silver and blue. It felt like the island was holding its breath. So was I. I made coffee and sat by the open doors, letting the damp breeze brush my face. My mind was calm but focused, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm has already passed. I had spent days undoing the web that tied me to them, cutting every thread one by one. But now came the question I hadn't dared to face: what came next? The phone lay on the table beside me, silent for once. I turned it on, half expecting another barrage of messages, but the screen stayed still. For a moment, I felt uneasy. Then I saw the signal bars flicker finally. A flood of notifications burst across the screen. Emails, voicemails, missed calls. The panic had reached its peak. I opened one out of morbid curiosity. It was from my mother. "Your father's blood pressure spiked last night. This isn't funny anymore, Clara. You're tearing this family apart." The next was from Lauren. "Ethan won't return my calls. He's been asking questions. I told him you're just bitter and jealous. He doesn't believe me anymore. I hope you're proud." I set the phone down and stared at the horizon, the faint outline of clouds glowing where the sun was trying to break through. For years they had made me believe I was the problem, the scapegoat. But now, with their world unraveling, I finally saw it clearly. They had built their peace on my silence, their happiness on my exhaustion. The rain slowed to a drizzle. I got up, grabbed my laptop, and sat at the desk overlooking the water. The cursor blinked in front of me, steady and patient. I opened the folder I'd created the night before, the Weston ledger. Page after page of receipts, transfers, wire confirmations, and emails stared back at me. This wasn't about proving I was right anymore. It was about documenting what had been stolen, not just money, but years of my life. I wanted the truth written down somewhere, permanent somewhere. It couldn't be twisted. I began to organize everything by year. 2017, the mortgage payment. 2018, the surgery. 2019 The Wedding Fund. 2020 Lauren's failed business loan. Every file carried a piece of me, my late nights, my sacrifices, my excuses. I labeled each folder carefully as if naming ghosts. Outside, thunder rolled across the distance. I could see the rain moving like a curtain over the sea, gray and soft. I worked for hours, my fingers flying across the keyboard. When I finished, I sat back and looked at the document list. 57 items, each one an act of loyalty that had been repaid with manipulation. Then I opened a blank page. At the top, I typed Summary of Financial Contributions, Clara Weston. Beneath it, I began listing everything. By the time I reached the bottom, the total made me stop breathing. $46,200. I stared at the number until the edges of my vision blurred. All those years, all those moments, when I thought I was helping, when I thought I was loved for it. That number wasn't just money, it was proof of who I had been. Proof that love for them had always come with a receipt. My throat tightened. I got up, walked outside, and let the rain wash over me. The air was thick and heavy, the sky dark but not angry. I tilted my face upward, feeling the drops slide down my skin. There was no sadness left, only something raw and quiet, a strange hollow gratitude. I had finally counted the cost of my loyalty. When the rain eased, I went back inside, toweling my hair dry. My reflection in the mirror caught me off guard. I looked older, not in a tired way but grounded. The kind of face that had learned how to stop apologizing. I lit a candle on the desk and sat down again. The flame flickered softly, reflecting in the glass of my laptop. I thought about everything Helen Brooks, my old mentor, had once told me. Revenge is never the goal, Clara. The goal is peace. Sometimes they look the same on the way there. I opened my email and began typing to her. Subject update. Helen, I finally did it. I walked away. They called it betrayal. Maybe it is, but for once it's mine. I'm safe. I'm working on documenting everything, mostly for myself. I don't know what comes next, but I think I'm ready to find out. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed send. The candle flickered again, and the wind outside shifted, rattling the bamboo shades. I stood and walked to the balcony. The sea was turning gold beneath the late afternoon light. For a moment, I thought I saw movement far away, a storm passing into the distance, leaving the sky open behind it. The phone buzzed again. A new message from an unknown number. Clara, this is Ethan. I don't know what's true anymore. But I saw some of the transfers. Lauren never told me about any of it. Please call me. You deserve better than this. I froze, rereading the message. Ethan, the man my sister was supposed to marry, the one she'd built her fairy tale around. He'd found out. The truth was working its way through their perfect little circle faster than I expected. For a long time I didn't move. I thought about what to do, whether to respond. Then I realized I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Not him, not them. The truth didn't need my permission to exist. I turned off the phone again and set it beside the candle. Outside, the wind had calmed. The sky was streaked with orange and violet colors I hadn't noticed in years. I poured myself a glass of wine and watched the horizon. My mind wandered to the last conversation I'd had with my mother before everything fell apart. She had said, "You'll always need us, Clara. Family is forever." It had sounded like comfort then. Now it sounded like a threat. Family wasn't forever. Family was a choice, and I was finally choosing myself. The night fell slowly. The air turned cool and soft, carrying the scent of rain and jasmine from somewhere unseen. I sat outside long after the candle had burned down, listening to the waves break softly against the wood. They had asked for an apology. They had demanded submission. Instead, I'd given them silence, and in that silence, I had built something stronger than forgiveness. I leaned back in the chair, eyes half closed, the stars reflected in the black water below. For the first time, I understood what freedom really felt like. It wasn't loud or wild. It was still patient and absolute. Tomorrow I would start the next step, but tonight I would simply exist. I whispered into the darkness. You wanted me small. You wanted me scared. Now you'll have to learn to live without me. The sea answered in its own language, a steady, endless rhythm that sounded like peace. The sound of waves filled the room as I opened my eyes. Morning light spilled across the floor, soft and golden, painting the wooden walls of the bungalow. I had slept for nearly 10 hours, dreamless and deep, but instead of peace, I woke with a strange hollowness inside me. The revenge was complete, the accounts frozen, the silence established, but the satisfaction I thought I'd feel was fleeting. The air felt too still, too perfect, as if the island itself were asking now what I made coffee, and stepped outside. The sea stretched out like glass, the horizon barely visible under a faint haze. I could smell rain in the distance, a reminder that even paradise had storms. The quiet here had begun to feel heavy, almost unnatural. For years I had been surrounded by noise, my mother's commands, Lauren's constant needs, the hum of city life. Now there was only me and the sound of the tide. I turned on my laptop out of habit, not because I needed to work, but because it gave me structure. My inbox blinked with new messages. One caught my eye from Helen Brooks. Subject: just checking in. Helen had been my first boss at Harbor Financial, a woman whose strength I had always admired. She had built her empire from nothing, surviving 2 divorces, a recession, and every form of betrayal the corporate world could offer. She used to say, "When people steal your time, steal it back with interest." I opened her email with a smile. "Clara, you've been quiet. That worries me. Whatever you're doing, I hope it's for yourself this time, not for anyone else. Remember, peace doesn't come from punishment. It comes from boundaries." Helen and I stared at the words until they blurred. Peace, boundaries. They sounded simple when she said them. For me, they had always been foreign concepts, like a language I was still learning to speak. I found myself typing before I could stop. "Helen, you're right. I did something big, maybe too big. But for the first time, I don't feel like I owe anyone anything. I just don't know what comes next." I hesitated before hitting send. The message wasn't really a confession. It was a plea for direction. Within minutes, her reply came back. "Call me." The international connection crackled when I dialed. "Clara," she said immediately, her voice warm, familiar. "You sound different." "I feel different," I admitted. "Good. That means something's working." There was a pause, the sound of papers shifting on her end. "Tell me," she said gently, "what happened?" I took a deep breath. I told her everything. The ultimatum, the years of financial servitude, the decision to cut them off, the silence that followed, the chaos that ensued. She didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just listened. When I finally stopped, my throat dry, she exhaled softly. "You know what you did," she said. "You stopped participating in your own exploitation. That's not cruelty, Clara. That's survival." "I don't feel cruel," I said. "But I don't feel whole either. Because revenge gives you power, not peace. Power fades once you've used it. Peace has to be built afterward." Her words landed like truth I hadn't been ready to hear. I leaned against the window frame, watching the waves shift under the sunlight. "How do you build peace?" I asked quietly. "You start by forgiving yourself for not doing it sooner." Something inside me broke at that. A tightness I hadn't realized I was holding finally loosened. I didn't cry, but I came close. Helen had always had a way of cutting through the noise without raising her voice. We spoke for nearly an hour. She told me about her first marriage, how she'd spent 10 years being her husband's unpaid secretary, his emotional punching bag. The day I left, she said he told everyone I was hysterical. That word still makes my skin crawl. But you know what I learned? People will always call women crazy when they stop being convenient. I laughed softly. My mother told everyone I was unstable. "I guess it's tradition." Helen chuckled. "Then break the tradition. Live your life so well it makes their lies look small." After we hung up, I sat for a long time letting her words sink in. The sky outside had cleared completely. The lagoon shimmered like liquid sunlight. I opened my journal and began to write not about them, but about me. The pages filled quickly. Things I wanted to do, places I wanted to see, classes I wanted to take, dreams I'd buried under obligation. When I finished, I flipped back to the first page where months ago I had scribbled, "I want my life back." Now I underlined it twice. That afternoon I decided to walk into the village on the far side of the island. It was small and quiet, just a handful of shops and a cafe overlooking the water. The owner, a woman in her 60s with sun-worn skin, greeted me with a smile. "You look tired," she said kindly, pouring me a cup of strong black coffee. "I've been resting for the first time in years," I said. "Resting isn't the same as healing," she replied, as if she could read my thoughts. "Healing takes honesty." I smiled. "You sound like my mentor." She laughed. "Then she must be wise." Her words followed me as I walked along the beach afterward, my footprints dissolving behind me. The tide was coming in slow and inevitable, just like change. Back at the bungalow, I found another message from Helen waiting for me. "When anger fades, something softer takes its place. Don't mistake that softness for weakness. It's power too. Use it well." I closed my eyes, hearing her voice in those words. For the first time since this all began, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I was walking toward something new. That evening, as the sun slipped into the horizon, I sat on the deck with a glass of wine. The air was warm, the sound of the waves steady. I thought about my family, not with rage this time, but with a kind of distant acceptance. They were who they were. I couldn't change them, but I could change what I allowed them to take from me. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't about letting them off the hook. It was about cutting the rope that still tied me to their damage. The candle beside me flickered in the wind, its flames small but steady. I whispered into the fading light, "I forgive myself for staying too long." The breeze carried the words away, but they didn't vanish. They settled somewhere inside me instead, quiet and true. Later that night, as the stars came out, I wrote one last note to myself in the journal. I thought revenge would free me, but peace is what I was really chasing. The sea outside murmured in approval, and for the first time in years I believed I might actually find it. The day began like every other, soft light pouring through the curtains, the ocean stretching out in calm perfection, but something felt off. When I reached for my phone, there was a weight in my chest I couldn't explain. The screen flickered to life, and before I even unlocked it, I saw the flood of notifications, mentions, tags, shared posts. I froze. My name was trending. I scrolled without breathing. Photos of me, some from work, some pulled from old social media, filled my feed, each one accompanied by vague, pitying captions. "Please keep Clara in your thoughts. She's going through a difficult time." Family is about compassion even when someone loses their way. My stomach turned. It was my mother's handwriting in those posts, the same tone she used when she wanted to sound noble. I clicked another one. Lauren, smiling in her engagement photo, had written, "We all make mistakes, but family forgives. Pray for my sister who's been struggling. We're doing our best to help her through this difficult period." I didn't need to read further. The story was clear. They had found a new weapon: public sympathy. I set the phone down and stared out at the water. The sky was cloudless, cruelly beautiful. I felt a tremor of disbelief, then anger so sharp it stole my breath. They weren't just punishing me for walking away. They were rewriting who I was. The more I scrolled, the worse it became. Strangers commented with heart emojis and prayers. Old acquaintances from Seattle reached out privately. "Heard you're going through something. If you ever need to talk." Even a few coworkers messaged, their words dripping with condescension. I could almost hear the whispers spreading. "She snapped. She ran away. Something's wrong with her." It was a perfect lie, gentle enough to sound kind, poisonous enough to stick. I threw the phone onto the bed and pressed my palms against my face. My pulse thundered in my ears. I had spent my entire life protecting that family, building them a facade of stability, and now they were using it as ammunition against me. After a few minutes, I stood and went to the desk. My laptop waited, screen blank, cursor blinking. I opened my emails, half expecting chaos there too, and I wasn't disappointed. Dozens of messages, reporters, curious colleagues, even old friends asking if I was okay. The worst was one from a man named Mark Davidson, an acquaintance from work. His email was short. "Your mother contacted HR. She said you're on a leave for mental health reasons." Should I be worried? I stared at the words until they blurred. My mother had gone to my workplace. She wasn't just smearing me online, she was trying to destroy my credibility, my livelihood, everything I'd built outside of her control. The air in the bungalow felt too thin. I walked out to the deck, gripping the railing until my knuckles turned white. The ocean shimmered below, oblivious to human cruelty. I wanted to scream, but the sound died in my throat. Then the phone rang again. A number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Clara," a woman's voice said softly. "It's Anna Clark. We met once." Ethan's cousin. I blinked, disoriented. "Anna, yes, of course. What's going on?" "I shouldn't be calling," she whispered, "but I thought you should know. Everyone's talking about you. Your mother told people you had some kind of breakdown, that you emptied their accounts and vanished. Lauren's saying you're unstable and jealous. She hesitated, her voice trembling. "I don't believe them. I've seen the way your family treats you. I just thought you deserved to know." My chest tightened. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Thank you for telling me." When the call ended, I stood there for a long time, the sound of the waves blurring into white noise. My family wasn't just panicking anymore. They were on the offensive. For a moment, I felt the old fear creeping back and the one that used to paralyze me. But then something shifted. The fear didn't stay. It burned away, replaced by clarity. I turned, walked back inside, and opened the Weston ledger. I scrolled through the receipts, the transfers, the evidence I'd gathered. I had spent my whole life documenting their demands, without realizing I was also building my defense. If they wanted to drag me through the mud, I'd show them what truth looked like on paper. For hours I worked in silence. The rain started again, steady and cleansing, drumming softly on the roof. I organized the files by category: medical, utilities, loans, luxury purchases. Every transaction had a date, a screenshot, a receipt. I created a clean, structured summary, a story written in numbers. Then I wrote an introduction. "This document contains a complete financial record of every expense I've covered for my parents Harriet and Charles Weston, and my sister Lauren Weston from 2015 through 2024. Each transaction was voluntary, recorded, and traceable. I am not unstable. I am not vindictive. I am simply done being their wallet." When I read the words back, they didn't sound angry. They sounded honest. As I finished, I remembered Helen's voice from our last call. "Facts don't scream, Clara. They stand." That became my mantra as I worked late into the night, formatting the ledger into something that couldn't be denied. When it was done, I printed 2 hard copies using the Resort Small Business Center and slipped them into a bright blue folder. I wrote on the cover in neat block letters, "The Weston Ledger." The act felt sacred, like signing my name to my own freedom. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the deck again, watching the sea under a moon half hidden by clouds. Somewhere in Seattle, my mother was probably spinning another story. Lauren was crying for attention. My father was pretending not to notice. But none of them could undo what I had built now. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew them. They wouldn't stop until they found a way to twist this back onto me. They'd go after my reputation, my job, maybe even the law. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. The truth was my weapon now, and it was sharper than their lies. The phone buzzed once more. This time it was a text from Helen. "You okay? I saw something online." I replied simply, "They've started their smear campaign. I'm finishing mine with facts." Her response came a few seconds later. "Then do it quietly. Power is loudest when it doesn't need to shout. I smiled faintly. She was right. I didn't need to expose them yet. Timing was everything. I closed my laptop, the folder resting beside it like a sleeping beast. Outside the wind shifted and I smelled rain again. I thought about the next step, how this story would end, and I knew it had to happen on their stage. The wedding. The one I was banned from. The one that was supposed to prove their perfection to the world. I whispered into the night, "You wanted me invisible. You'll see me soon enough." The ocean roared softly in response, as if promising to bear witness. When I finally went to bed, the folder lay on the nightstand, the blue cover gleaming faintly in the dim light. I fell asleep to the sound of rain and waves, dreaming not of revenge but of justice, the kind that doesn't scream but stands unshakable when the storm hits. The plane cut through heavy gray clouds as Seattle came into view, the skyline glistening beneath a thin drizzle. I hadn't seen the city in months yet. It felt both foreign and painfully familiar. The hum of the engines matched the rhythm of my pulse, steady, unhurried, certain. I stared out the window as the wheels touched down, a soft jolt, shaking me into the reality of what was coming. I wasn't here to reconcile. I was here to finish what they started. The air outside the terminal was colder than I remembered, the kind of damp chill that clung to your clothes. I pulled my coat tighter around me and inhaled deeply. The city smelled of rain, coffee, and faint exhaust, home, but not mine anymore. A cab driver waved me over, and I climbed into the back seat. "Where to?" he asked. "Green Lake," I said quietly. He nodded, merging into traffic. The streets blurred past the same old coffee shops, the familiar bus stops, the intersections I used to wait at with grocery bags and exhaustion. But something was different this time. The city hadn't changed. I had. The woman who once lived in this place had been soft-spoken, desperate to belong. The one returning was calm, deliberate, unshakable. When we reached Aunt Marianne's house, she was already waiting by the porch. She looked smaller than I remembered, her gray hair pulled into a loose bun, her eyes kind but sharp. I stepped out of the cab, and before I could say a word, she wrapped her arms around me. "You did the right thing," she murmured against my shoulder. "I've been waiting for you." Her voice was steady like an anchor. We went inside the house, smelling faintly of chamomile and old books. The warmth hit me immediately. "You must be freezing," she said, taking my coat. "Sit down, I'll make you tea." I followed her into the kitchen and watched her move with quiet efficiency. The kettle hissed, the scent of mint filling the air. "I saw the news," she said after a moment, turning to face me. "Your mother's been talking. But you already know that." I nodded. "She always needs an audience." Marianne smiled sadly. "She's always needed a mirror. You just stopped reflecting her." Her words sank deep. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed someone who spoke truth without cruelty. Over tea, we talked about everything: Lauren's endless posts, the gossip spreading through the neighborhood, the way my parents had turned my silence into scandal. "People are starting to see through it," Marianne said. "Your father's embarrassed. He knows this went too far." I looked down at my cup. He always knew. He just never stopped her. Marianne sighed. "He's weak, not wicked. But weakness can destroy as much as malice." Outside rain streaked down the window. I could see the reflection of the blue folder in my bag resting on the table. It was never far from me now, like a shield. Marianne followed my gaze. "What's that proof?" I said simply. "Of everything." She didn't ask to see it. She didn't need to. "Are you going to the wedding?" she asked instead. "Yes." She studied me for a moment, then promised me something. "Don't go to hurt them. Go to free yourself." "I'll try," I said. But some truths hurt no matter how softly they're spoken. That night I slept in my old childhood room. The same faded wallpaper, the same window that looked out on the rain-soaked street. On the desk sat a photo from years ago, Lauren and me as children, smiling with ice cream cones, our mother's manicured hand resting on her favorite daughter's shoulder. I turned the frame face down. I dreamt of water that night. of standing waist-deep in the ocean, the waves rising higher, whispering secrets. When I woke, dawn was breaking, the first pale light cutting through the blinds. The city outside was waking, two cars' voices, the low hum of normal life. I made coffee and watched the sky turn from gray to silver. Marianne joined me, still in her robe. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" "Every second," I said. "They've told so many lies. If I don't speak, those lies will live forever." "Maybe," she said, "but truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand long enough to be seen." Her words reminded me of Helen's advice, and I smiled faintly. "You sound like my mentor." "She sounds like someone who's lived." Marianne sipped her coffee and studied me. "You look stronger, different." "I am," I said. "They built their power on my guilt. I'm done paying the interest." That afternoon I went into the city. I stopped by the boutique where Lauren used to shop, the cafe where my parents always had brunch on Sundays. Everywhere I went, whispers followed. Some people smiled politely, others looked away. I didn't care. Let them whisper. It meant the story was shifting. Later I stopped at a small bookstore near Pike Place Market. The owner, an old man with silver glasses, greeted me warmly. "You look like you're carrying heavy truths," he said with a grin. "Something like that," I replied. He handed me a blank leather journal. "Write them down. Paper never gossips." I bought it without hesitation. By the time I returned to Marianne's house, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, sharp with cedar. I sat by the window with my new journal, writing everything I remembered, every payment, every manipulation, every quiet betrayal. The words poured out like confession and cleansing in one breath. Marianne appeared at the door. "Dinner's ready," she said, then paused when she saw what I was doing. "You're building your own record now, aren't you?" I nodded. "They wrote their version in gossip and pity. I'm writing mine in truth." She smiled. "That's how you win, Clara. You outlive the noise." After dinner, she handed me a small envelope. Inside was an old letter, yellowed at the edges. "Your grandmother wrote this years ago," she said. "I think she meant for you to read it someday." The handwriting was shaky but elegant. "Family is a choice you make every day. Blood only means something if it doesn't bleed you dry." I read it twice before folding it carefully. "She knew," I whispered. "She always did," Marianne said. "Your mother learned to take. You learned to give. It's time you learned balance." Later that night, I prepared my clothes for the wedding, a simple sapphire blue dress, understated and clean. Not a costume for confrontation, but armor for clarity. I laid the folder beside it, its blue cover gleaming faintly in the lamplight. Before bed, I called Helen. She answered on the first ring. "I'm back," I said. I figured, she replied, her tone warm. "Are you ready?" "I'm not going there to destroy them," I said. "Just to stop pretending they're still family." "Then, you've already won," she said softly. The next morning, I left Marianne's house just as the sun broke through the clouds. The streets shimmered with light rain still clinging to the trees. My cab waited at the curb, engine humming. I hugged my aunt tightly. "Remember," she said, "don't let them pull you into their storm. Stand still and let them drown in their own tide." I nodded, slipped into the car, and looked back once as her figure faded in the rearview mirror. The city grew smaller behind me as we drove downtown. The wedding was just hours away. Every mile brought me closer to the confrontation I had avoided for most of my life. My hands rested on the folder in my lap, the edges sharp against my fingers. They said, "I couldn't live without their love," I whispered to myself, watching the skyline draw nearer. But they're about to find out what happens when I stop paying for it. The rain began again, gentle and relentless, as if the sky itself was ready for the truth to finally fall. The morning of the wedding arrived with a pale silver light spreading across the city. The rain had stopped some time before dawn, leaving behind a sheen on every surface, like the world had been polished clean for what was coming. I stood in front of the mirror in Aunt Marianne's guest room, fastening the last clasp on my sapphire blue dress. My hands were steady. The woman staring back at me didn't look like someone coming to beg for forgiveness, she looked like someone who had nothing left to lose. Outside, the cab idled quietly in the driveway. I picked up the blue folder from the bed, its weight familiar and comforting, and slipped it into my bag. When I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a baptism. Every nerve in my body hummed with purpose. I had spent my whole life walking into rooms on their terms. Today I would walk in on mine. The drive downtown was quiet. Seattle's skyline rose ahead of me, glass towers reflecting the gray morning sky. The Fairmont Hotel came into view, a monument to elegance and pretense, all marble floors and gold-trimmed chandeliers. I'd been there once before years ago for a company event. I remembered how my mother's voice had echoed through the lobby, then telling me not to embarrass her. This time she would be the one exposed. The lobby buzzed with guests dressed in satin and pearls. Laughter, clinking glasses, the faint notes of a string quartet floated through the air. I caught glimpses of faces I hadn't seen in years, family friends, distant cousins, the kind of people who fed on gossip like sugar. Heads turned as I stepped inside. Conversations slowed. Some whispered my name, their eyes flicking to the folder in my hand. My mother saw me first. She froze mid-sentence, her expression tightening, then rearranging itself into something almost gracious. "Clara," she said, her voice low but trembling. "What are you doing here?" I smiled faintly. "You told me to beg for forgiveness if I wanted to attend. So here I am," her eyes flashed. "Don't start. Not today." "Relax," I said softly. "I'm not here to ruin your perfect day. I'm here to finish my part in it." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You are not welcome here. You've caused enough shame already." I leaned in, my voice calm. "Then consider this my farewell gift." Before she could respond, I turned and walked toward the ballroom. The doors were open, revealing a space dripping in luxury. White lilies, gold tablecloths, candlelight flickering under crystal chandeliers. At the far end of the room stood Lauren in her wedding gown, radiant and fragile under all that lace. She was laughing nervously with Ethan, who looked uneasy. The music quieted as I entered. Every head turned. The sound of heels on marble echoed louder than the quartet had played all morning. I felt hundreds of eyes on me, their shock thick enough to taste. Lauren's face went white when she saw me. "Clara," she breathed, her voice cracking. I stopped halfway down the aisle. The silence was electric. I could hear the soft clinking of glasses, a cough somewhere in the back, the faint rustle of fabric as people leaned in to whisper. "I came to deliver something," I said, clearly my voice carrying through the room. "A wedding gift." Ethan frowned, stepping forward. "This isn't the time. It's exactly the time," I said. "You deserve to know what kind of family you're marrying into." Gasps rippled through the guests. My mother hurried forward, hissing, "Enough, Clara. You're making a fool of yourself." I reached into my bag and pulled out the blue folder. The sound of the clasp opening cut through the murmurs like a blade. "No," I said evenly. "I'm done being the fool." I handed the folder to Ethan. His confusion deepened as he flipped it open. His eyes darted over the pages, bank statements, receipts, transfers, all meticulously labeled. His expression changed from curiosity to disbelief to quiet fury. "What is this?" he demanded, looking at Lauren. She stammered, I don't know." "It's proof," I said, stepping closer. "Proof of every dollar I've given this family over the last 7 years. The mortgage payments, the hospital bills, the designer clothes, even the down payment for your honeymoon." Lauren's face twisted. "You're lying." "I don't need to lie," I said, my voice steady. "I brought receipts." A murmur spread through the room, the kind of collective gasp that feeds on spectacle. Guests leaned closer. Ethan flipped another page, his jaw tightening. "You paid for all of this," he said quietly. I nodded. "All of it. Every time they said they couldn't manage, I made it happen. And when I stopped, they said I was unstable. They told everyone I ran away because I couldn't handle stress. The truth is, I just stopped being their bank." Lauren's composure cracked. You're trying to humiliate me. I shook my head. No, Lauren, I'm trying to free myself. Her voice rose. You ruined everything. You ruined it yourself when you built your future on someone else's sacrifices. The room fell silent again. My mother stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale lips pressed into a trembling line. My father had appeared by her side, eyes wide with shock. He looked at me, then at the folder in Ethan's hands. Is this true? He asked softly. My mother snapped, Don't you dare take her side. Enough. Harriet, he said, his voice breaking through hers for the first time in years. He turned back to me. I didn't know it was this bad. No, I said quietly. You didn't want to know. Ethan dropped the folder on the nearest table. Pages scattered across the floor like fallen leaves. Lauren tried to grab his arm, but he pulled away, shaking his head. I can't do this, he said, his voice raw. I can't marry into a lie. He walked out. The door slammed behind him, the echo ringing through the ballroom like a final verdict. Lauren crumpled to the floor, sobbing into the folds of her gown. My mother turned to me, eyes blazing with hatred. You've destroyed this family. I met her gaze evenly. No, Mom, I just stopped pretending it wasn't already broken. The guests began to whisper again, louder this time, shocked, fascinated, hungry for gossip. I didn't wait for the rest. I turned and walked toward the exit, the sound of my heels sharp against the marble. Behind me, the music started again, a desperate attempt by someone to fill the silence. Outside, the air was cool and sharp, washing over me like mercy. The clouds had broken open, revealing a slice of blue sky. I stood on the steps of the hotel, breathing deeply, the noise of the city rising faintly in the distance. My phone buzzed in my bag. A message from Helen. How did it go? I typed back. The truth finally stood up for itself. A cab pulled up to the curb. As I climbed inside, I caught my reflection in the window, calm, clear-eyed, untouchable. For the first time, I realized I didn't feel angry anymore, just free. As we drove away, the hotel shrank in the distance, its golden windows gleaming in the sunlight. I didn't look back. Some stories don't end with applause or tears. Some end quietly with peace earned, not granted. I rested my hand on the folder in my lap, though I no longer needed it. It had served its purpose. The truth had been spoken, and the world had shifted, however slightly, in my favor. By the time we reached the edge of the city, I rolled down the window and let the wind in. It carried the faint scent of rain and spring, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was breathing without permission. The city was quieter the next morning. A thin veil of fog hung over the rooftops, softening the edges of everything. I woke in Aunt Marianne's house to the smell of coffee and something baking in the kitchen. For a moment, I lay there, listening to the faint hum of rain against the window, letting the silence soak in. There was no dread waiting at the edge of my mind, no fear of what message or demand might come next. Only quiet. When I went downstairs, Marianne was sitting at the table with 2 mugs of coffee. I saw the news, she said, handing one to me. Your sister's wedding made the morning headlines. I sat down, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. Let me guess, socialite wedding implodes after family scandal. Her smile was faint. Something like that. But don't worry, the truth has a way of spreading faster than the lies now. I nodded, staring out the window. The rain made the street look like glass, and for once the gray didn't feel oppressive. It felt clean. They'll blame me, I said. They already are, she said. But for the first time, they don't have anyone left to listen. I let out a quiet breath and took a sip of coffee. It was strong, bitter, grounding. The taste of survival. Later that morning, I went for a walk around the neighborhood. The trees were heavy with rain, their branches dripping onto the sidewalk. Everything smelled like earth and renewal. When I passed the bakery near the park, the owner, a kind woman who'd known our family for years, looked up from the counter and gave me a nod. Hold your head high, sweetheart, she said. About time someone said the truth. Her words stayed with me all the way back home. When I returned, there was a single envelope waiting on the porch. My name written in my father's careful, slanted handwriting. I stood there for a long time, rain dripping from my hair, before finally taking it inside. At the table, I opened it slowly. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Clara, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I should have stopped your mother years ago. I should have seen how much we were asking of you. I was a coward hiding behind excuses. I don't blame you for what happened. I only hope you find peace in the life you're building without us. You deserved better. I'm proud of you, even if I was too weak to say it when it mattered. Dad. I read it twice before setting it down. My throat tightened, but the tears didn't come. Instead, there was a quiet sense of release, like the door to a locked room had finally opened. He wasn't asking for redemption. He was acknowledging the truth. That was enough. When Marianne came in and saw me holding the letter, she didn't ask. She just placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. He always loved you, she said softly. I know, I whispered. He just didn't know how to show it. That afternoon, I sat by the window with my laptop. An email notification appeared from Helen. Clara, I heard what happened. Word travels quickly in this city. Don't let anyone convince you that you've lost something. You've gained your freedom, and that's worth more than any reputation they tried to take. I'm proud of you. When you're ready, I want to talk about your future. I think there's a place for you at my firm if you want it. Helen, I smiled, the kind that came from somewhere deep. I hadn't realized how much I wanted a chance to start over. I typed back quickly, Helen, thank you. I'm ready. By evening, the sky began to clear. The rain stopped, leaving behind a soft pink glow along the horizon. Marianne cooked dinner, roasted chicken, vegetables, warm bread. We ate together by candlelight, not because of ceremony, but because it felt right. The small moments had begun to matter again. After dinner, we sat on the porch with tea. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of cedar. The quiet between us wasn't heavy. It was full, like something sacred. You know, Marianne, said, stirring her tea slowly, your grandmother used to say peace is the loudest kind of revenge. Because it doesn't demand anything, it just exists, untouchable. I smiled. She was right. Marianne looked at me over the rim of her cup. You're free now. But don't mistake freedom for emptiness. You have to fill it with something new. I'm trying, I said. Helen offered me a position. Maybe that's where I'll start. Her face brightened. Good. It's time you worked for yourself, not against yourself. Later that night, after she went to bed, I sat in the quiet house, the letter from my father still on the table. I picked it up again, running my fingers over the paper. His words no longer hurt, they healed. They closed a chapter I had kept open for too long. I wrote him back, even though I didn't know if I'd ever send it. Dad, I forgive you. Not because it fixes anything, but because I can't carry it anymore. I hope you find peace too. I'm finally learning what that word means. When I finished, I slipped the letter into the same envelope and left it on the windowsill. The moonlight caught its edges, soft and silver. The next morning I woke early, made coffee, and sat by the window watching the sun rise over the rooftops. The city below was quiet, the air fresh after the storm. My phone buzzed with a message from Helen. Come in next week. Let's start planning. I smiled and set the phone aside. For the first time in years, my future didn't feel like a continuation of someone else's story. It felt like my own beginning. A week later, I moved into a small apartment overlooking the water. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I filled it with plants, books, and light. Every evening, I'd light a single candle and sit by the window, letting the quiet wrap around me. There was no longer any need for defense or revenge. The truth had done its work, and now all that remained was life. Sometimes I thought of Lauren, of whether she hated me or if she finally understood. But I didn't linger on it. Some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt, and that was okay. One night, while walking home from work, I passed a cafe window and caught my reflection in the glass. I barely recognized myself standing tall, shoulders relaxed, eyes bright. I realized I was no longer waiting for anyone to see me. I had finally learned to see myself. When I got home, I opened my journal to a blank page and wrote a single line. Peace looks good on me. Outside the city, lights shimmered on the water, endless and alive. I lifted my mug of tea toward the window, in a quiet toast to the woman I used to be, the one who had given everything to be loved, and to the woman I had become, who no longer needed permission to be free. And as the night deepened, I whispered the truth I had learned through every storm, every silence, every loss. Family doesn't define you. Choice does. The candle flickered beside me, steady and sure, and I knew with absolute certainty that this was what freedom sounded like. No noise, no fear, just the quiet rhythm of my own heart finally at peace. The morning sunlight poured through the wide windows of my apartment, soft and golden, touching everything with warmth. The plants I'd kept alive lined the sill, their leaves glowing in the light. Steam curled from the coffee cup in my hand, and for a moment I simply stood there breathing. The city outside was waking slowly, the distant hum of traffic, the faint cry of gulls near the bay. My world had changed in ways that couldn't be measured by money or revenge. It had changed because for the first time in my life, peace wasn't something I was waiting for. It was something I lived in. I set the cup down and opened the window. Cool air rushed in, clean and bright. The scent of rain still lingered in the morning breeze, the kind that felt like a fresh start. I looked around my apartment, simple, calm, a space entirely my own. A small bookshelf stood by the wall, filled with paperbacks and journals. On the table sat a single framed photograph, me and Aunt Marianne at Pike Place Market, both laughing so hard we were blurry. It wasn't the kind of picture that begged to be displayed, it was the kind that felt like home. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt honest. I went for early runs along the waterfront, worked at Helen's firm during the day, and spent quiet evenings on the balcony watching the sunset melt into the bay. There was no drama, no shouting, no manipulation, just small, beautiful moments stitched together by peace. Helen often said I had a calm energy now. "You're the kind of woman people listen to," she told me last week. I smiled when she said that because I had spent so many years speaking into silence, trying to be heard. That morning, as I got ready for work, an envelope slid through the door. No return address. I hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, my father's, slanted but careful. I sat on the couch, the paper trembling slightly between my fingers as I opened it. "Clara, your mother and I are living quietly now. I wanted to thank you for the letter you sent. It meant more than you know. Your mother doesn't say much, but she keeps your old picture on the mantel. We're both learning. I hope one day we can see you again, even if it's just to say thank you in person. You were right to walk away. I see that now. Love, Dad." I read it twice before folding it neatly and setting it beside my coffee. There was no ache, no sharp pain like before. Just understanding, I whispered softly. "I hope you find your peace too." Later that day at the office, Helen stopped by my desk. "You're quiet today," she said. "Is something wrong?" "Not wrong," I said, smiling faintly. "Just full." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "You've come a long way, Clara. Don't ever forget that." Sometimes, I said, I think the hardest part wasn't leaving them, it was believing I deserved to. Helen smiled, her eyes kind. "That's what freedom sounds like." When I left work that evening, the sky was painted in deep amber streaks. I walked along the pier before heading home, stopping to watch the ferries glide across the water. Their lights shimmered over the waves, breaking into tiny golden ripples. The air smelled of salt and cedar. I felt small in the best way possible, like I belonged to something bigger than all the noise I'd escaped. At home, I lit a candle on my desk and opened my journal. The same one I'd started the day I returned from Bora. I turned to the last blank page and began to write. I used to measure love by what I gave away: money, time, forgiveness. But now I understand that love isn't sacrifice. It's space. It's the room you make inside yourself to grow. I don't hate them anymore. I don't even need them to understand. The truth served its purpose, and now I can finally rest. I paused, staring at the words until they blurred. Then I closed the journal and set it beside the candle. The room felt warm, almost sacred. I walked to the balcony and leaned against the railing, the night air cool against my skin. Below, the city was alive with soft light and distant laughter. Aunt Marianne called just as I was watching the last colors fade from the sky. "You should see the newspaper," she said, her tone calm but knowing. "Your sister moved out of their house. They're selling the property." "Really?" I asked. "She's working at a small design studio now. She's different, quiet. I think the world finally caught up with her." I thought for a moment before answering. "That's not punishment, that's balance." Marianne chuckled softly, spoken like someone who's found her footing. After the call ended, I stood there for a long time, letting the stillness wrap around me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't vindicated. What I felt was something purer: release. Karma had done what it always does, quietly, without spectacle, and I was at peace watching it unfold. Inside, the candle burned lower, the flame flickering softly. I sat at the table and opened the Weston Ledger one last time. The numbers didn't sting anymore. They told a story I had already finished reading. I smiled, closed the folder, and placed it into a box labeled Lessons Learned. Then I wrote a small note on top of it. "Don't reopen unless you forget who you are." That night, I cooked myself dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and roasted vegetables, and poured a glass of wine. The simple act felt like ceremony. Every moment did now. I no longer measured my life in transactions or obligations, but in breaths and choices. I'd learned that revenge was never about destruction, it was about reclamation. I stepped outside again, barefoot, feeling the cool concrete under my feet. The city stretched below me, full of strangers' stories and second chances. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Peace was never theirs to give. It was mine to find." And in that stillness, I felt something shift, the final thread of the old life snapping loose. Maybe you've felt it too. Maybe you've been the quiet one, the giver, the forgotten. Maybe you've stayed too long where you were only valued for what you could provide. If you have, I hope my story reminds you that it's never too late to leave the noise behind. To choose yourself. To stand up even if your voice shakes. Tell me where you're watching from tonight. Tell me what peace looks like for you. And if you believe that the truth, no matter how quiet, deserves to be heard, stay here. There are more stories waiting for you, stories where justice finds its way home and where silence finally learns how to speak. The candle flickered beside me, the flame steady and small. Outside, the wind carried the sound of laughter from somewhere down the street. I smiled, feeling it settle in my chest. The weight, the lightness, the truth of everything. And as the screen faded to black, I whispered one last time, "This isn't a story about revenge, it's a story about freedom."